بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. So in the previous lessons we've been going through currently the section on ghusl and some of the rulings regarding the ghusl. We spoke about the Jumu'ah and the ruling of the ghusl for Jumu'ah and when it is supposed to be done. Today we're going to begin on the section that explains how exactly you are supposed to do the ghusl. How exactly does a Muslim do the ghusl? So here we have a hadith of Aisha radiyallahu anha where she mentioned كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا اغتسل من الجنابة يبدأ فيغسل يديه ثم يفرغ بيمينه على شماله فيغسل فرجه ثم يتوضأ ثم يأخذ الماء فيدخل أصابعه في أصول الشعر ثم حفن على رأسه 3 حفنات ثم أفاض على سائر جسده ثم غسل رجليه متفق عليه واللفظ لمسلم. In this hadith, Aisha radiyallahu anha, she says that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, when he used to make the ghusl due to the janabah, when he used to make the ghusl, he would begin by washing his hands. The first thing, he would begin by washing his hands. Then he would pour water with his right hand onto his left hand and wash his private area. So 2 steps so far. The first step, he would wash his hands. The second step, he would then pour water with his right hand onto his left hand and wash his private area. Then after that, the third step, he would make wudu, the normal wudu. He would then make the normal wudu. Then the fourth step, ثم يأخذ الماء فيدخل أصابعه في أصول الشعر. The fourth step, he would get the water and he would put his fingers into the roots of his hair. Put them right into the roots of his hair. فَيُدْخِلُ أَصَابِعَهُ أُصُولَ الشَّعْرِ. He would put his fingers into the roots of his hair. The fifth step, ثُمَّ حَفَنَ عَلَى رَأْسِهِ 3 حفنات. Then he would pour water onto his head 3 times. He would then pour water onto his head 3 times. Then the 6th step, أفاض على سائر جسده. he would pour water onto all of the rest of his body. He would pour water all onto the rest of his body. And the seventh step, he would wash his feet again at the end. He's already washed them when he did the wudu part, but then at the end, as the final step, wash the feet again before moving out, before finishing. Those are the 7 steps mentioned in this hadith. Shaykh Al-Fawzan is going to go through those now in detail in the explanation. So the hadith says that the Prophet ﷺ, when he would make the ghusl from janabah, the janabah is the major impurity, the sexual impurity due to intercourse or the release of semen. And so when the Messenger was upon that state, he would not recite the Qur'an, he would not touch the Mus'haf, he would not sit in the mosque in that kind of state of janabah. Those kinds of things are not done until the ghusl is made. And Allah mentioned in the Qur'an, وَإِن كُنْتُمْ جُنُوبًا فَطَهَّرُوا, that if you are in a state of janabah, of that major impurity, then purify yourselves. Do the ghusl. If you are in janabah, then do the ghusl. So in this hadith, Aisha radiyallahu anha mentions how the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam used to do that ghusl. She mentions as the first step, which was to wash the hands. إذا اغتسل من الجنابة يبدأ فيغسل يديه. He would begin and wash his hands first. يعني من مفصل الكوع up to the wrists. Up to the wrists. Because linguistically speaking in Arabic, the word yad could mean the hand as we talk about the hand. It could mean all the way including the forearm. It could even mean all the way up to the shoulder. Linguistically it's possible. So here the Shaykh explains that the meaning of the hadith of Aisha radiyallahu anha, that he used to begin by washing his hands, was as we say in English, the hands, up to the wrists. He would wash his hands to begin with. فهذا ما بدأ به صلى الله عليه وسلم وهو غسل الكفين في بداية الطهارة سواء كانت وضوءا أو اغتسالا فإنه يستحب ذلك. Whether you are about to make the ghusl or you are about to make normal wudu, it is recommended to begin with this step in both circumstances. The step of washing the hands first. Whether you're about to do ghusl, as we see here, or even if you're just going to make wudu, it is recommended to begin by washing the hands first. And that is a separate action from the wudu and the ghusl. People, like we mentioned last time, when they wash the hands at the beginning, they think later on in the middle of the wudu, they don't need to wash their hands again. That's a mistake. So this is an introduction to doing the ghusl or the wudu, that you wash your hands first. وقد تقدم وجوب غسلهما بعد القيام من نوم الليل في قوله صلى الله عليه وسلم, and we've already mentioned as well the obligation of washing them when you wake up from sleeping, from the night sleep, and that was in the hadith إذا استيقظ أحدكم من نومه فلا يغمس يده في الإناء حتى يغسلها ثلاثا فإن أحدكم لا يدري أين باتت يده. There was the hadith that mentioned, when one of you wakes up from sleeping, then do not dip your hand into the vessel of water until you wash them 3 times. For indeed you do not know where your hand has slept at night. Meaning you do not know what your hands have touched at night. Maybe without you knowing, whilst you're asleep, your hand touched your private areas. So you do not know where they have been and what they may have touched without you knowing at night. So in the morning, you're not supposed to begin straight away making wudu and your hands on your face and making the wudu. Rather, you wash them first, then start the wudu with the clean hands. And the same with the janabah. Before making the ghusl, wash the hands first, then begin all of the process of the purification. وذهب بعض أهل العلم إلى أن سبب استحباب غسل الكفين قبل الغسل والوضوء هو أن الكفين تستخدمان في غرف الماء، فإذا أدخلتا في الإناء قبل غسلهما ورفع الحدث عنهما فإن ذلك يؤثر في طهورية الماء فيصبح مستعملا. You remember there was an issue earlier on we discussed, right at the beginning of this particular book we started, regarding water, that some of the scholars mentioned if you have a vessel of water, a large bowl of water for example, and you are upon janabah, in that state of janabah, if you dip your hands in straight away, then you have now, it is as though the janabah has now gone into that water. It is now classed as used water. And there's an issue regarding that. Some of the scholars consider that the water is no longer usable for the rest of the purification. It is as though the impurity has now gone into it. And that is why you're supposed to wash your hands separately first, then dip them in to use it for the rest of the body. Even though, like we said, the majority of the scholars do not hold the opinion that it becomes impure like that. But this is a possible reasoning to avoid, generally anyway, that you wash your hands separately before beginning the wudu or the ghusl or the remaining parts of the wudu and the ghusl. So then, that's the first step, the washing of the hands. The second step mentioned in the hadith of Aisha radiyallahu anha, ثم يفرغ أو يفرغ بيمينه على شماله فيغسل فرجه. The second step, now that the hands are clean, and remember, in those days it wasn't a shower. In those days there would have been a big bowl of water, a big barrel of water, and they would be using that water and taking that out and making the ghusl. So now it mentions after the hands have been washed, then he would get the water with his right hand, pour it onto his left, using that to clean his private areas. So you're pouring the water with your right hand and using the left to clean the private areas. That is the second stage. So notice the details being given here. It is with the left hand that you then wash the private parts. It is with the right hand that you pour the water. So in these days, if it is a shower, it is the right hand you're going to hold the shower with, for example, and with the left hand that you're going to wash the private areas with. So that is the second thing mentioned. هذا هو الفعل الثاني بعد غسل الكفين فإن الجنب يغسل فرجه يعني يستنجي بالماء فيغرف بيده اليمنى ويغسل فرجه باليد اليسرى لذا فالاستنجاء أو الاستجمار واجب قبل الوضوء إذا خرج من الإنسان شيء من بول أو مني أو مذي أو غائط. And of course, al-istinja, which is what that is, cleaning the private areas with the water, the istinja, that is something which is required as a necessity before making wudu if something has exited from the private areas. For example, if you have urinated, you cannot just go and make wudu first. You must do istinja. You must clean that area first, the private areas first, then you go make the wudu. Or if semen has exited from there, or feces, anything of that nature that has exited from the private areas, that must by necessity be washed first. Then you can go and do the rest of the wudu. If you have not washed that and the private areas are still upon impurity, you cannot do the rest of the wudu. That needs to be washed first. So that's why the first step here after washing the hands, so if we keep it in order, washing the hands was the first step. The second step was then to wash the private areas, using the right hand to pour the water and the left hand to actually make contact and wash that area. ولا يصح أن يتوضأ الإنسان قبل أن يستنجي. It is not valid for a person to make wudu if you have not done istinja, if you have not cleaned that area, if something had exited. If you broke wind, for example, then you can just go make wudu. You don't have to do istinja. Nothing else has exited if nothing else had exited. أما إذا لم يخرج منه شيء وأراد أن يتوضأ فإنه لا داعي للاستنجاء. So if you haven't used the toilet or nothing else has exited from the private areas, your wudu broke because you fell asleep or something, then you can go make the wudu directly. But here we're talking about the circumstance where something has exited from the private area, then you must make istinja first, then the rest of the wudu. So the second step here being mentioned is the washing of the private areas with the left hand. The third step mentioned in the hadith of Aisha, ثُمَّ يَتَوَضَّأ, then he would make the full wudu, the normal full wudu. أنه صلى الله عليه وسلم بعدما استنجى توضأ وضوءه للصلاة. He would then make his normal wudu, the normal wudu. You then make that. لأن عليه طهارتين، طهارة من الحدث الأصغر وهو الوضوء، وطهارة من الحدث الأكبر وهو الاغتسال. فبدأ صلى الله عليه وسلم بالطهارة من الحدث الأصغر وهي الوضوء، أو أنه صلى الله عليه وسلم غسل أعضاء الوضوء ناويا رفع الجنابة عنها وبدأ بها لشرفها. There are different explanations as to why the wudu would be required when you're making ghusl. Some of the scholars, they say, because it is a necessity in and of itself, the wudu is required for your prayer or whatever afterwards. Others, they say, it's not because of that necessity, because once you make the full ghusl, you're upon purification anyway. But they say the wudu is done within the processes of the ghusl to honor those body parts. The wudu body parts are honorable. On the day of judgment they will be shining, and the believers will be recognized by the brightness and the radiance from the wudu body parts that they used to wash. So from the nobility and the honor of those body parts, the wudu areas, some scholars say maybe that is why it is legislated or upon the sunnah of the messenger that you do the wudu within the process of the ghusl. Then the fourth step. So far now, you've washed your hands, you've washed your private areas, and you've made wudu. That's where you are so far. Then the fourth step, notice at this stage you still haven't washed all of your body yet. The fourth step, he would then put water into his fingers. ثم يأخذ الماء فيدخل أصابعه في أصول شعر. He would then with the fingers and the water, put them in through his hair to the roots of the hair. To the roots of the hair. The fingers going into the roots of the hair. يعني أنه بعدما فرغ من الوضوء أدخل أصابعه مبلولة بالماء في أصول شعر رأسه، لأنه صلى الله عليه وسلم كان يغذي شعر رأسه، وتغذية شعر الرأس على صفة الواردة عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم سنة لمن راعى آدابها وكيفيتها الواردة عنه صلى الله عليه وسلم. وإدخال أصابعه صلى الله عليه وسلم في أصول شعر يدل على كثافة شعره. The fact that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to insert his fingers into the roots of his hair indicates that he had thick hair. That he had thick hair. And it's mentioned in the seerah how it was somewhat curly and thick hair. And so he would insert his fingers to get to the roots of that hair. Then the fifth step was to pour water onto the head. He would pour 3 cups of water, handfuls of water onto his head. والحفنات جمع حفنة وهي ملء الكفين مجموعتين. والله أعلم الحكمة من جعلها 3 حفنات هو أن يصل الماء إلى أصول الشعر وفروعه. So then the fifth step here, he would fill his 2 hands and pour that water onto his head 3 times. 3 times fill the hands, the 2 hands, and pour that all over his head. That would be done 3 times. And the Shaykh says perhaps the wisdom in doing it 3 times is again so that the water goes right in there into the roots of the hair and gets to the skin, so that the water goes through the hair, penetrates into the skin of that person onto the head. فيكون الماء قد تبلغ لجميع رأسه وتبلغ لجميع رأسه ظاهر الشعر وباطن الشعر وجلدة الرأس. So then in that way, by putting the fingers in and then 3 handfuls of water onto it, that ensures that all of the hair has now got water on it, and it's got right through to the roots of the hair and onto the skin of the head. Then the next step number 6. Step number 6, ثم أفاض على سائر جسده. In step 6 is when he would then pour the water all over his full body. Pour the water all over his full body. وهو أن يصب الماء على بقية جسده. That's the point and that's the stage at which you then have the water going all over your body. And it will be mentioned in some of the narrations, he would begin doing that with the right hand side of his body first, getting the water all down everywhere on the right hand side of his body first, then the water all down everywhere on the left hand side of his body, until all of his body had now been wetted with that water. Then the 7th step, the final step, ثم غسل رجليه. He would then wash his feet again. But here the question is, هل أنه صلى الله عليه وسلم أخر غسل رجليه حينما توضأ في البداية حتى فرغ من الاغتسال ثم غسلهما، أو أنه غسل رجليه في الوضوء حينما توضأ في البداية ثم أعاد غسلهما بعدما فرغ من الاغتسال. Here the final step mentions that the messenger washed his feet. The Shaykh says, is that because in step number 3, when he made the wudu, did he leave the feet out at that stage? And then he does the feet at the end? Or did he do the feet at that stage as well, and now he's doing them again at the end? Which of the two circumstances? Is it that in step 3 he didn't wash the feet, and that's why you do it in step 7 at the end? Or did he do them in step 3, completed the full wudu, and then you repeat the feet again in step 7? Which of the two? The Shaykh says, بأن كلا من الأمرين جائز ومحتمل. Both scenarios are possible. The hadith doesn't explicitly highlight which of the two it is. The hadith does not explicitly highlight which of the two it is. It could be that in step number 3, when you're making the wudu, that you leave the feet out. Then you go through step 4, 5 and 6 of the ghusl, and then in the last step you wash the feet, and that then completes the wudu. Or the other scenario, that you finished the full wudu at that time in your 3rd stage of the ghusl, and then you're repeating the feet at the end. Both are possible, the Shaykh says. Both possibilities could exist. فَمَنْ غَسَلَهُمَا ضِمْنَ أَفْعَالِ الْوُضُوءِ ثُمَّ أَعَادَ غَسْلَهُمَا فِي آخِرِ الْغَسْلِ فَهَذَا صَحِيح. So whoever washes them initially in stage number 3 with the wudu, washes them at that point, completes a full wudu, then washes them again at the end, perfectly okay, the Shaykh says. وَمَنِ اقْتَصَرَ عَلَى غَسْلِهِمَا آخِرَ الْغُسْلِ فَهُوَ صَحِيحٌ أيضا. But if somebody in that stage 3 does his wudu but leaves the feet and goes through the other stages, and then at the end finishes off the feet for the completion of the wudu, then that is also correct and possible, the Shaykh says. بل إنه لو اقتصر على غسلهما آخر الوضوء ولم يعد غسلهما فإن فعله صحيح أيضا. And that's it, yes. So if a person was to only wash them at the end without repeating them, or wash them 2 times, both of those scenarios are correct, both of those actions are correct, both of those ways are okay. ثم إن ظاهر قولها رضي الله عنها أنه أفاض الماء على سائر جسده يفهم منه أنه اكتفى بغسل جسمه مرة واحدة، بينما جاء في بعض الروايات أنه غسله 3 ولا إشكال في ذلك، إذ إن المرة الواحدة التي تعم الجسم تكفي وتجزئ والتثليث مستحب. In this narration, when we got to stage number 6, washing the full body, beginning with the right hand side first, then the left hand side, the washing of the full body. In the hadith, it doesn't mention anything about doing that twice or 3 times. It just says he then washed his body. And so by default, that would indicate just the once. And that is okay. That is correct. If a person washes his full body with 1 full washing, then that is complete and your ghusl is correct. If a person was to do it 3 times, to wash all of the body, then to wash it again, and then to wash it all again 3 times, that is mustahab. It is recommended. But if you do it just the once, your ghusl is legitimate, it is valid, and you are now upon purification. So what do we learn here to summarize from this hadith? Number 1, أن المرأة تخدم زوجها في وضوئه وفي طهارته. This is taken from this particular circumstance, that it mentions a wife can aid her husband in making the wudu and the ghusl, bringing the water for him and bringing the vessel of water in it. Of course, these days now with the showers and the baths and other things, it's a different situation. But of course, in those days, you would have a barrel of water or a bowl of water. So it mentions, it is highlighted in the hadith that the wives of the Messenger would aid him. Here, Aisha radiallahu anha was obviously there, either bringing the water for him or doing something. That's how she saw how he was making the full ghusl and described it. She was there helping him, bringing the water or whatever it might have been. Secondly, and we mentioned that at the beginning as well, if you remember, it is permissible for a husband and a wife to make the ghusl together or to make it one after the other. That is permissible between the spouses. Secondly, فيه دليل على بداءة الجنب بالاستنجاء بأن يغسل فرجه ويزيل ما عليه من أثر الخارج. The evidence highlights, this hadith highlights that when you are going to make ghusl or wudu otherwise, that you must begin that. The prerequisite to that is the washing of the private area. If something has exited from the private area, if you've urinated or some semen has exited or pre-seminal fluid has exited, then in those kinds of circumstances you would wash the private area first before then making the wudu or the ghusl, as the Messenger did in these stages of the ghusl as we saw. Thirdly, that the one who is making the ghusl begins with the wudu. That was stage number 3. Wash the hands, wash the private areas, then make wudu. Then after that, run the fingers in the hair, wash the body, and complete with the feet. So the wudu was in the early stages before the full washing of the body. The wudu was in there first. So that indicates that somebody who is making ghusl, they should begin with the wudu first. فيدل على أن المغتسل من الجنابة يبدأ بالوضوء أولا ثم يغتسل بعده. هذا الأفضل والأكمل. That is the most perfect and complete and best way to make the ghusl. That you do the wudu first, then you do all of the rest of the ghusl after. Because that is the way that the Prophet ﷺ did it. ولو أنه نوى دخول الوضوء في الاغتسال وأفاض الماء على جميع جسمه ناويا الطهارتين الصغرى والكبرى دخلت الصغرى في الكبرى وأجزأ ذلك. However, as a fiqh ruling, if you miss that step of making the wudu, and you do the other steps, the hair and washing, and then you get to step number 6, which is actually now going to be step number 5 because you missed the wudu out. Everybody remember that? There was step number 1, wash the hands. Step number 2, wash the private areas, istinja. Step number 3 was the wudu. Step 4 and 5 was the fingers in the hair and the washing of the head. Step 6 was the washing of the body. Step 7, the feet. If you miss out the wudu, you've missed out step number 3. So you've got 6 steps in total now. If you miss out step number 3, the wudu one, go straight to the fingers in the hair and washing the hair. And then step number 5 now, which is washing all of the body. When you're on that step of washing all of the body, if you intend, within that intention of washing all the body, you intend wudu as well. Because when you wash all the body, by default, you have washed the wudu body parts too. If you wash all of your body, then within that you have washed the wudu body parts too, obviously. So if you make the intention that with this full washing of my body, I am intending the wudu in it as well, then that counts. And it is valid. You have intended the wudu within that full washing. It's going to come in there. The face is going to come in there. The arms are going to come in there. The feet, all of it comes in, that full washing. So if you make your intention at that stage with the full washing of wudu as well, and you don't do it as a separate step earlier, it is okay and it is valid. So the Shaykh says in that case, the wudu would simply come into the fold of ghusl. The ghusl is the larger purification. The wudu is the smaller purification. The smaller purification comes within the greater purification. So if you did that, it would be valid. نعم. The next point, أنه يشرع للمغتسل أن يخلل شعر رأسه إذا كان كثيفا. That it is legislated for a person to run his fingers in through his hair, if it is thick hair. If it is thick hair, to run the fingers in through that hair. والتخليل معناه إدخال الأصابع مبلولة بالماء داخل الشعر، يعني ومن خلال الشعر حتى يصل الماء إلى أصول الشعر. So the meaning of that is that you run your wet fingers right in through the hair, so that the water gets to the roots of the hair. And that is, of course, for the one who has thick hair. For the one who does not have thick hair, or the one who does not have hair, then of course that is not a requirement or something needed within the ghusl. For the one who has barely any hair, when the water is being poured, it's gonna go right on to the hair. Remember, there were two steps there next to each other. One was running the fingers into the hair to get to the roots. Then the next step straight after that was pouring the water right all over the head. But if you've got thin hair or very little hair, if you miss the finger step out and go straight to the next step of pouring the water over the head, with thin hair, it's going to cover all of it anyway. So the finger step prior to that wouldn't become a necessity then. It wouldn't be required then. If you know that your hair is of the quantity that a bit of water poured onto it makes it all wet, then you don't need to do the fingers. وكذلك يشرع له أن يحفن 3 حفنات من الماء على رأسه حتى يتبلغ الماء إلى داخل الشعر. And so this is mentioned, it is legislated to get 3 handfuls of water during the ghusl process, to get 3 handfuls of water onto the head everywhere, to get it all around the head and the hair. So those 2 steps could become 1, depending on the thickness of the hair. If a person has thick hair, both steps are needed there. If a person has light hair or hardly any hair, then in that case the finger step is not required. Washing it with the water gets into the roots anyway. Some brothers look like they're smiling, but wait another few years, you'll be in the other category as well. Then after that it mentions في الحديث دليل على إعادة غسل الرجلين أو على تأخير غسل الرجلين بعد فراغه من الاغتسال. We mentioned that before about the legislation to wash the feet again at the end. In some narrations it mentions why. Not sure he mentions it here, but in some places, some of the scholars, they mention the reason as to why you have to wash the feet again at the end. Anybody know why? The impurities might go there.
Is it what you're standing in, maybe?
Uh-huh.
Is it because it's obviously on the floor, isn't it?
Uh-huh. So again, but let's imagine they did the full wudu in step 3. Remember, there were 2 possibilities. If he's done the full wudu in step 3, then why does he still have to wash his feet at the end? That's the question.
Nakhla and then he washed his
So what's the purpose then? Why do you have to wash your feet again?
obviously impurities in the area because of
It's about the impurities. Again, these days with your showers, all the water is flowing away. But in the olden days, it wouldn't be the types of facilities we have now. The water, you're pouring it, it's all going to be falling and just puddling up on the ground where you're standing. You're getting the water, you're pouring it. When you're doing it on your body, you're getting the bucket or whatever, you're pouring it. All the water is just going to be puddling on the floor where you are. There's no sinkhole and there's no other pipe work or anything in those days. So all the water would just be puddling at your feet. All that water puddling up at your feet, that is the water you've been using to wash all of your janaba, to wash yourself from the janaba, from the impurity. All of that water is now puddling up at the feet. So now the last thing that you should therefore wash is the body part, which is the last body part in contact with all of that water. And that's why in some narrations it does say that he would actually step aside out of that area, out of where the water has been puddling up now from his ghusl. He would step aside from that and then wash his feet. Because if you wash your feet there, then it's kind of like the same situation. You're still in all of that water. So then it mentions in some narrations he would step aside out of that puddle and then wash his feet. So now they are clean, free of all of that, and now it's a complete purification. So that is the reason some of the scholars they mention for the washing of the feet at the end. And there was the evidence also that one full washing of the body is sufficient. One full washing of the body is sufficient. It doesn't require more than that. If a person did do more than that, if a person washed it 3 times, then that is recommended but not a necessity. It also mentions here وَلَهُمَا مِنْ حَدِيثِ مَيْمُونَةٍ ثُمَّ أَفْرَغَ عَلَى فَرْجِهِ فَغَسَلَهُ بِشِمَالِهِ ثُمَّ ضَرَبَ بِهَا الْأَرْض وفي رواية فمسحها بالتراب وفي آخره ثم أتيته بالمنديل فرده وفيه وجعل ينفض الماء بيده. Here it mentions in this version that he poured water onto his private areas and he washed them with his left hand. Then he struck the ground with his hands. Again, all of this now you have to recognize it's not the showers we have now and or that people have here. In some countries it would still be completely as it is mentioned here. You would be having a shower in some type of mud hut or something. So here then it mentions after washing the private area he would strike the ground to get some dirt on that in order to then cleanse his hands after having washed the private areas. To cleanse the hands after having washed the private areas, to make sure anything that came off the private areas in the washing process is completely taken off by rubbing his hands in some dirt and washing all that off. 1 second. ثم أتيته بالمنديل فرده. And it mentions here, then I came to him with a cloth and he rejected it, he returned it. يعني لم يأخذه, meaning a cloth, a towel to dry himself at the end, and that he didn't want it. The wife of the Prophet says at the end, I came with him with a cloth, I came to him with a cloth, a towel to dry himself, but he didn't want it. لم يأخذه لينشف أعضاء جسمه من الماء الذي هو من أثر الاغتسال وذلك لبقاء أثر الطاعة عليه. He didn't want the towel to dry himself, and that is, as some scholars say, perhaps due to wanting to leave that water to drip off naturally, because that water was now the remnants of an act of worship. Doing the ghusl is an act of worship. You've done that full act of worship. This water that remains on your body now, that's dripping away and finishing off, is now the leftover from that act of worship. So he didn't want to remove it, he wanted that to leave be left and dry up by itself naturally, as that was the remnants, the leftovers of that act of worship. So the further benefits that are understood from this narration or this addition is that after washing the private areas, you could touch the ground in order to get a better cleanse on the hands after that. And also from this narration we can understand that you could say that it is a sunnah, or to phrase it in the other way, it is disliked to dry yourself with a towel after the ghusl. غير أنه لا مانع من نفض الماء نفضا دون تنشيف. The messenger wanted to leave that water to dry by itself. So the Shaykh says فيه دليل على كراهة التنشيف بعد الاغتسال والوضوء, that it is disliked to dry it all up immediately after wudu or ghusl. Leave it to dry off by itself. وأن السنة عدم التنشيف, and that the sunnah of the messenger was not to dry it all up, leave it to dry off itself. But the Shaykh says there is no problem in fanning oneself or using the towel to kind of dry it without wiping it clean. To kind of dry yourself or to blow some wind onto yourself like that to make it dry up a little bit quicker. No problem with that. That is no issue. I mean, even to dry yourself with a towel, there is no issue. There is no sin. There is no problem. But this is just the way of the sunnah of the messenger that he did. In this country, I mean, these days, mashallah, you can do it, no problem. These days you have an opportunity with the weather the way it is very possible to do that. In most other times, more than likely it is not possible in this country, but for when it is possible to do that, to allow it to dry off itself, then that is the way of the messenger in doing so. That brings us to the end of those two narrations. So now then, what were the questions regarding them?
Just wanted to ask, the second time you wash the hand, could you first wash it when you start? The second time you do it, is it required to do it as you do the first one, like wash the whole hand?
Absolutely. So when we spoke about the washing of the hands when you start wudu or ghusl, that's like a prerequisite. It's like a prerequisite. You're supposed to wash your hands as like a prerequisite, as like an introduction. Then you're going to start your wudu or your ghusl. So now when you wash your hands, and now you're going to start your wudu. So you start your wudu, then you're going to do your face, your mouth, your arms. But when you get to the arms, you have to wash all of them up to including the elbows and all of the hands fully again. Don't think, well, you've already washed them, they're already wet at the beginning. That was just an introductory washing, a prerequisite. The actual wudu is now. So imagine them that you haven't done anything to them yet. You haven't done wudu on them yet. That was just a prerequisite washing. Now you got to do the full washing on them. In the actual wudu when you do your arms. And this is the mistake many people make. When they get to that section, they do the arms properly and they don't really bother with their hands too much because they're already wet from the beginning. They think, yeah, they're already wet, I did it. Now is when you have to do it properly. Now is the wudu that you're doing. At the beginning was a sunnah, that washing of the hands.
So you've done your wudu during the ghusl, but by mistake you will touch yourself. You have to repeat it?
We cover this. Didn't we cover that section about the private area? So there were two opinions about this. If you end up touching your private parts after you've made wudu. And the issue is if you touch your private parts directly, direct contact. Not if you touch them on top of your garments that you're wearing. That is then an obstacle, it's an obstruction, there's no direct contact. But if you make direct contact, like when you're making ghusl, that at the end of the ghusl, maybe when you're drying yourself, and you end up making contact with your private parts accidentally, does it break your wudu and you have to do your wudu again or not? There were two opinions, you remember. One opinion said, it breaks your wudu, whether you touch them with desire or without desire. Touching the private parts breaks your wudu. But the other opinion said, upon the hadith of Busra, إِنَّمَا هِيَ بُضْعَةٌ مِنْكَ, that it is only another body part. Like all your other body parts, it's just a body part. So if you make contact with no desire, nothing, just contact when you're drying yourself or something, it's just another body part. No wudu is required from that then. So there were those two opinions regarding that. Regarding whether you have to do it again or not. And Allah alam, but it appears that it is a body part. If there is no desire, there is nothing, you're just making the ghusl, you're just drying yourself and some contact occurs, as it may occur, then this doesn't break your wudu and it's okay, inshallah.
It's also considered that you've done wudu. Is there a difference of opinion that after you do ghusl you don't have to do wudu?
Well, some scholars do hold the opinion it requires a specific wudu. But most of them will say when you do the full washing of the body, like a Shaykh Abdul Muhsin al-Abbad, he used to say when you do the full washing of the body, just run your hands over the wudu area. Run your hands over your arms, your face, your feet, your head. Just run your hands over those areas when you're doing the full washing of the body stage, and that definitely then covers you for wudu. That is enough. These days now with the shower, so you're going to be under the shower and you're washing all of your body, the water's coming down on all of your body. As it's coming down on all of your body, just run your hands over the wudu areas in that process. And that's it, that's a wudu covered then. Within that, run over the areas, do the nose and the mouth, that's the only specific thing you have to do. The rest of it, you're just running your hands over all the areas and that's it.
My question was based on that. So, step number 3, you miss out the full wudu, and step 6, when you're washing your full body, shouldn't you do it in sequence when you're doing wudu? Basically, your mouth first, your nose, obviously your face.
In sequence. Well, when we're saying run your hands over those areas in sequence, it is in sequence, but it's not a specific separate wudu. It's upon that opinion of it being included within it. But the Shaykh Abdul Muhsin used to say, just run your hands over those areas. Run them over the areas where the wudu is normally done with the water coming down on you, and that is wudu done within the ghusl.
If you were to make ghusl without the wudu, would you do it in that specific order? So say you start with your head and then use private parts and everything afterwards.
It's valid. The minimum requirement of ghusl is to wash the full body. That's the minimum requirement. So even if you got these stages not in that kind of order, but the minimum is that you wash the full body, top to bottom. You do your istinja, you wash all of the rest of the body, that is a ghusl that is valid. You could, if you imagine you're upon janaba. You're upon janaba, you're next to the sea, you make the intention, I'm going to make ghusl. You jump into the sea, dip your head right in, and come out again 5 seconds later, you've got ghusl. Because you've washed the whole of your body with the intention of ghusl. And that's ghusl.
You still have to do the mouth and nose as well.
According to the opinion of the scholars of doing that, but according to some, it wouldn't necessarily even be required. The minimum according to some is just the ghusl. But let's say we stick to that opinion, so then yes, do the madmada and the istinshaq. The rest you just literally dip yourself in and out. Your full body has been washed. That is technically a ghusl done as the minimum requirement.
And the same Bismillah before wudu, ghusl, do you do it before washing the hands 3 times or after washing the hands 3 times?
The basmala? The basmala, as we said, it's differed over anyway. As to the requirement of it, the Hanbalis, they view that it is obligatory. The Jumhur, they say it is mustahab. But then yes, at the beginning,
Before washing the hands.
before washing the hands, that's all part of the process now. Anybody else?
You know, basically, would you wipe over your head? Obviously, when you're doing wudu in the ghusl, so you wipe over your head. Then you'll also put your fingers in your head, and then you'll also pour water on your head. So essentially 3 things for the head.
Because the washing is the full water being thrown onto the head completely. The fingers is only required if you have thick hair as part of the washing process to get in there, and then the wudu process would just be to wipe over the top. But it all depends on the thickness of the hair. That was the same as what we discussed in making wudu regarding the thickness of the beard. Depending on the thickness of the beard, there's a different ruling when you're making wudu. If you have a thick beard, and what is defined as a thick beard? What was the definition of a thick beard? Where you can't see the skin through it. So now when you look at somebody's beard, sometimes people have very light fluffy beards, and you can see their skin all the way right through it. Other people, their beards, they may not be long or big. That's not the point of a thick beard. They could be small, but they're thick. You can't see any of their skin through the hair. So if a beard is thick, you cannot see the skin through it, then the ruling was that you're supposed to do again the takhleel, to do some takhleel. That was the ruling. Mustahab to do takhleel if you have a thick beard. So when do you do takhleel? Takhleel meaning the fingers.
When you wash the face.
Huh? So you remember, when it is light, a light beard, you have to wash right through it. A light beard where you can still see the skin through it, when you wash your face, you have to wash right into it. The full thing. When it's a thick beard, then you can just run the fingers over. You could run the fingers through and over. But if it's a light beard, there's no running the fingers through. It's a full wash of that area because your skin is visible. So that's like your face. Your face, that's still part of your full face. It's visible, your skin. So you've got to wash it with the rest of your face fully. But if it's a thick beard, you can do the fingers and run over the top. You don't need to wash the whole beard and have it soaking if it's a thick beard.
But Ustad, this part is not obligatory to wudu anyways. It's so if you beard will straw here, it's a thin beard, you don't have to wash it.
Correct, because the area of the face is from the hairline down to the jaw bone. So what's below the jaw bone, then that is not required because that is not considered face. The face is from the jawline up to the hairline. That is all, and from ear to ear. That is all considered face. Below the jaw, under it is not considered part of your face. So if you had a light beard, you'd have to wash it all up to the jawline, but not underneath here necessarily. A long beard, they mention wipe over the whole of it. Wipe over the top of it all. As a wiping. Anybody else?
So you have to do the basmala twice if you hold it to be wajib when you start the ghusl and when you start the wudu as well. At the beginning of the ghusl.
Allah alam. Allah alam, if they say that, that would have to check. If the ones who hold the opinion, it would be in the Hanbali books of Fiqh. The ones who hold the opinion that it is obligatory to say Bismillah at the beginning, is it twice or once? Allah alam what they say on that. Anybody else? Alright, next time then, we'll start with the rulings on ghusl for women. And obviously the majority of the rulings are the same. Because the principle Islamically is all of the rulings for men are the rulings for women. Unless something is specified. So one of the things that would become specified for women, what is one issue that women have in the ghusl that men do not typically have? Or some men. The long hair that is tied up. Or not tied up, in braids and plaits. Imagine now a woman has long hair and it's all knotted up in those plaits. And then you have to make a ghusl. Then what do? Do you have to untie all of those plaits, untie it all, get the hair completely wet, or what do? Those kind of rulings, there are some hadith talking about them in the Sunnah, about what a woman can do in that kind of circumstance. A woman who has long hair and it's braided or plaited together, does she have to unravel it all, wash it all down to the core, Or is there some other way of doing it? That is what we'll begin with then, inshaAllah ta'ala, from the next session next time. Any other question or anything up to there then?
Just on that point, if a man has his hair in that same style, does it fall under the same ruling, or is it specific for the women?
No, a man's hair would never be of that length. A man is not supposed to have the hair. The Prophet used to have his hair halfway between the earlobe and the shoulders. A woman's hair could be all the way down to the waist, but a man's hair would never be long enough to cause that type of issue. You're not supposed to have the hair beyond that type of length. That would be imitation of the women. So a man's hair would never have that same circumstance. Alright, we'll conclude upon that for today then. Insha'Allah ta'ala, in the next session we'll start with that next part regarding the women and the ghusl. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala